"I won't hurt you," the Alpha King said. Then he claimed the Omega no one wanted. "Do not look at him, girl. To meet the Alpha King's gaze is to invite death." The warning hissed through the freezing chapel, but it was too late. I had already looked. Standing amidst the velvet-clad elite, I was the stain on the snow. Seraphima, the scentless mistake, the Omega of Wintervale. Desmond Hartwell, the Goldheart King, didn't smell like royalty. He smelled like iron, rain, and ancient violence. He stalked past the line of trembling debutantes, ignoring their perfumed wrists, and stopped directly in front of me. The silence was deafening. He reached out, his hand large enough to crush my skull. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. I didn't. I couldn't. I waited for the execution. Instead, the monster of legends fell to his knees. The wind in Wintervale did not howl, it screamed. It was a jagged, tearing sound that stripped the warmth from the stone walls of the estate and settled deep in the marrow of anyone foolish enough to live there. For 22 years, Seraphima Whitford had learned to live with the cold. It was safer than the heat of the pack's attention. She scrubbed the flagstones of the scullery, her hands raw and red, the water in her bucket turning a murky grey. She was invisible here, or as close to it as one could get. In the hierarchy of the northern packs, an Omega was already the lowest rung, a servant, a peacemaker, a creature of submission. But Seraphima was something worse. She was a null, a genetic anomaly, a wolf with no scent. To the heightened senses of the lichen kind, scent was identity. It was status, mood, health, and soul. To have no scent was to be a ghost, a void in the air. The superstitious elders of Wintervale claimed it meant she had no soul at all. "You missed a spot, ghost." Seraphima froze, the rag dripping dirty water onto her apron. She didn't need to look up to know who stood in the doorway. The scent of pine and arrogant musk filled the small room instantly. Corbin Stonevale. Once, years ago, they had been children playing in the snow. Now, he was the heir to the Wintervale pack, and she was the thing he wiped his boots on. "I will clean it, Alpha Corbin," she whispered, keeping her eyes on the wet stone. Corbin stepped into the room, kicking the bucket over. The grey water sloshed across the floor she had spent the last hour scrubbing. Seraphima didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that reacting only fed the beast. "My mother says the king arrives by sundown," Corbin said, leaning against the doorframe, watching the water soak into her woolen skirt. "She's in a panic. She thinks having you in the main hall will offend his senses. Or lack thereof. I am to stay in the kitchens, my lord," Seraphima replied, wringing out her rag. "I won't be seen." "Good." Corbin took a step closer, his boots squelching in the mess he'd made. He crouched down, forcing his face into her field of vision. He was handsome in a sharp, cruel way, with the pale blonde hair of the northerners and eyes like chipped ice. "Because if Desmond Hartwell sees you, he won't just ignore you. They say the Goldheart King kills anything that annoys him. And you, Seraphima? You are very annoying." He stood up and laughed, a barking sound that echoed off the damp walls before turning and leaving her in the puddle. Seraphima waited until his footsteps faded before she let out a breath. She grabbed the bucket and began to mop up the water again. She didn't cry. Tears were a luxury for wolves who had hope. The estate was in chaos. The visit of the Alpha King was not a celebration. It was an inspection. The Goldheart line had ruled the 12 territories for 3 centuries. But Desmond Hartwell was different. He had ascended the throne 5 years ago after a bloody coup that decimated his own family. Rumors flew across the continent like crows, that he was mad, that he was cursed, that his inner wolf was so large it was slowly tearing his human body apart. Seraphima! The sharp voice of Ulena Crestfield, the head housekeeper, cut through the kitchen. Ulena was a severe woman who wore her keys like weapons. Here, Mistress Ulena. Leave that. We need hands in the great hall. The banners are twisted, and the hearths aren't roaring high enough. But Corbin said, I don't care what the boy said, Ulena snapped. We are short-staffed. You will drape the garlands on the high beams. You're light. You can climb. Just stay out of sight and do not speak unless spoken to. And for the goddess's sake, try not to look so empty. Seraphima nodded and wiped her hands on her apron. She moved through the service corridors, the stone humming with the frantic energy of the pack. Servants rushed past with silver platters, and high-ranking wolves preened in front of mirrors, adjusting their furs and jewels. They were all terrified. Seraphima slipped into the great hall from the shadows of the upper gallery. The room was magnificent, a cavern of dark wood and iron chandeliers, now festooned with the gold and black banners of the king. The high table was set with enough food to feed a village for a month. She climbed the ladder to the rafters, balancing precariously on the heavy oak beams to fix the velvet drapes. From up here, she could see the entire court assembling. The air shifted. It wasn't a sound, but a pressure. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees in a second. The chatter below died instantly. Even the fire seemed to cower in the grate. The double doors groaned open. Seraphima pressed herself flat against the beam, peering down through the dust motes. He walked in. Desmond Hartwell was a giant. He wore black military fatigues rather than royal finery, a stark contrast to the silks and velvets of the Wintervale nobles. A heavy fur cloak hung from his broad shoulders, made from the pelt of a timber wolf. A warning. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and then broken. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, cutting through his left eyebrow. But it was his presence that terrified her. Even from 20 feet up, she felt it. A suffocating, heavy dominance that tasted like ozone before a lightning strike. He didn't walk, he prowled. Behind him walked his beta, Bennett Crestwood, a man with glasses and a weary expression, holding a tablet as if checking off a list of dooms. Lord Stonevale, Desmond said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to the rafters without effort. It was a baritone so deep, it felt like a physical caress against the spine. Your Majesty, Alpha Stonevale, Corbin's father, bowed low. The entire court followed suit. Wintervale is honoured. Wintervale is late with its tithes, Desmond replied, ignoring the pleasantries. He walked past the bowing Alpha, his eyes scanning the room. He looked bored, lethally bored. And your borders are porous. I passed 3 rogue scents within a mile of your gate. We will double the patrols, sire, Stonevale stammered. Desmond stopped at the foot of the dais. He turned slowly, looking at the women lined up, the daughters of the nobility, dressed in their finest, hoping to catch the eye of the bachelor king. Seraphima watched from above, her heart hammering against the wood of the beam. She saw Rosalinda Crowhall, the most beautiful she-wolf in the territory, step forward and flutter her lashes. Rosalinda smelled of expensive rose oil and ambition. Desmond didn't even blink. He looked through her as if she were made of glass. Bennett, Desmond said, rubbing his temple as if he had a headache. How long do we have to endure this? The protocol dictates a feast, sire, Bennett said softly. And the presentation of the eligible. Desmond let out a growl that made the glass in the windows vibrate. I don't want a mate, Bennett. I want quiet. Up in the rafters, Seraphima shifted slightly to get a better look. A loose nail on the beam snagged her apron. She tried to pull free, but the movement dislodged a heavy iron candle snuffer resting on the beam's edge. Time slowed. She watched the heavy iron tool fall. It tumbled end over end, plummeting toward the polished floor below. Clang! The sound was like a gunshot in the silent hall. It landed 5 feet from the king's boots. Every head snapped upward. Seraphima froze, pressing herself into the shadows, praying to the moon goddess that she was invisible. Desmond Hartwell didn't look up immediately. He looked at the iron tool on the floor. Then, slowly, terrifyingly, he tilted his head back. His eyes found her instantly. They were gold, molten, burning gold, with vertical pupils that were blown wide. He didn't shout. He didn't order the guards to bring her down. He flared his nostrils, inhaling deeply. A frown creased his forehead. He looked confused. "Come down," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a summons that pulled at her very bones. The descent from the rafters felt like a funeral procession. Seraphima's hands shook so badly she nearly slipped on the ladder rungs twice. Below, the court of Wintervale watched in horrified silence. The Null Omega, the ghost in the attic, had just nearly brained the Alpha King with an iron candle snuffer. When her feet touched the floor, Ulena Crestfield was already there, her face pale with fury. She grabbed Seraphima's arm, her nails digging into the flesh. "Forgive her, Your Majesty," Ulena hissed, bowing low while dragging Seraphima down with her. "She's a clumsy servant, a nobody. She will be punished severely. Take her away." 2 guards stepped forward, but Desmond raised a hand. The motion was slight, but the guards froze instantly, as if they had hit a glass wall. "I didn't say take her away," Desmond said. His voice was quieter now, laced with a strange curiosity. "I said come down." He walked toward them. The crowd parted like water, terrified of touching him. Up close he was overwhelming. The sheer heat radiating from his body was like standing next to a furnace. He smelled of power, raw, unfiltered, and chaotic. Bennett, the beta, stepped up nervously. "Sire, please, it's just a servant. We have the treaty to discuss." "Quiet, Bennett," Desmond murmured. He didn't look at his beta. His golden eyes were locked on Seraphima. He stopped a foot away from her. Seraphima kept her head bowed, staring at his combat boots. She was shaking, her scentless body trembling with the instinctual fear of a predator. "Look at me," he commanded. She hesitated. I said, "Look at me." She lifted her chin. When their eyes met, Seraphima expected to see rage. She expected the disgust she saw in Corbin's eyes, the dismissal she saw in her father's before he died. Instead, she saw shock. Desmond Hartwell was staring at her, as if he had never seen a woman before. He leaned in, invading her personal space, and inhaled deeply again. He moved his head to the crook of her neck, his nose brushing the pulse point behind her ear. The entire court gasped. This was intimate. This was behavior reserved for mates. Desmond pulled back, his brow furrowed. "Silence," he whispered. Seraphima blinked, confused. Your Majesty?" "You have no noise," he said, his voice sounding dazed. "Everyone else, they scream. Their sense, their hormones, their fear. It screams. It never stops screaming." He reached out, his rough thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "But you are quiet. Like a frozen lake." Corbin Stonevale stepped forward, unable to contain his indignation. "Sire, she is a null. She has no scent. She is defective, a genetic dead end. You shouldn't soil your hands." Desmond turned his head. He didn't growl. He simply looked at Corbin with a violence so profound that Corbin took 2 stumbling steps back, tripping over his own cape. "Speak again," Desmond said softly, "and I will tear your tongue from your head and feed it to you." Corbin went white and snapped his mouth shut. Desmond turned back to Seraphima. The madness that often swirled in his eyes, the frenetic energy that terrified the kingdom, seemed to settle. His shoulders, which had been tight with tension, dropped an inch. "What is your name?" he asked. "Seraphima, Your Majesty," she whispered. Seraphima. He tested the word. The Burning One. A strange name for something so cold. Rosalind Crowhall, sensing her opportunity slipping away to a servant in a dirty apron, stepped forward with a rustle of silk. Your Majesty, surely you must be tired. The banquet is prepared. This creature can be dealt with later. She is an embarrassment to Wintervale. Desmond ignored Rosalind entirely. He was studying Seraphima's hands, the red, chapped skin, the scars from years of hard labor. He frowned, a dark thundercloud passing over his face. Who did this to you? He asked, lifting her hand. His palm was calloused, hot and dry. I work, sire. I am a servant. You are a wolf, he corrected. Wolves are not beasts of burden for other wolves. He looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over the finery of the Wintervale elite. His lip curled in a sneer. You drape yourselves in silk while one of your own rots in the scullery. Is this the pride of the North? Alpha Stonevale stepped forward, sweating. Sire, she has no place in the pack hierarchy. Without a scent, she cannot be ranked. She cannot mate. She is charity. Charity? Desmond repeated the word like it tasted like bile. He looked back at Seraphima. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something other than fear. He wasn't looking at her like a defect. He was looking at her like she was a riddle he needed to solve. Bennett, Desmond said, not breaking eye contact with her. Yes, sire. Prepare the carriage. Sire? Bennett blinked, adjusting his glasses. We just arrived. The inspection is over, Desmond said. Wintervale is rot and vanity. I have seen enough. He tightened his grip on Seraphima's hand. And I am taking my tax. Panic flared in Seraphima's chest. My king! What do you mean? Desmond leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. You are the only thing in this world that doesn't make my head pound, Seraphima. I am taking you with me. No! The shout came from Eulina. You can't! She belongs to the estate! Desmond straightened to his full height, the air around him crackling with alpha power. The pressure in the room became unbearable, forcing several wolves to their knees. I am the king! Desmond roared, his voice shaking the banners on the walls. Everything belongs to me. The land, the stone, the blood in your veins, and this girl. He looked down at her, his expression unyielding. You have a choice, Seraphima. You can stay here, scrubbing floors for people who hate you, or you can come with me. Seraphima looked at the faces of the people she had known all her life. Corbin, who mocked her. Ulina, who beat her. The Alpha, who ignored her. Then she looked at the monster. The king who was said to be mad. His hand was warm. It was the only warmth she had felt in years. Her voice failed her. Come, he said. It was softer this time. She took a step, then another. Desmond Hartwell nodded, satisfied. He didn't let go of her hand. He pulled her against his side, tucking her under the heavy fur of his cloak. It smelled of him. Dark, overwhelming, and safe. He walked her out of the great hall, past the stunned nobility of Wintervale, and didn't look back. The interior of the royal armoured SUV, Desmond apparently eschewed traditional carriages for long travel, was larger than Seraphima's bedroom. It was upholstered in black leather, and soundproofed so heavily that the screaming wind of Wintervale vanished the moment the heavy door slammed shut. Seraphima sat pressed against the far door, her knees pulled to her chest. She was still wearing her dirty apron. She smelled of dishwater and fear. Across from her, Desmond Hartwell sat sprawled like a king on a throne of shadows. He had removed his heavy fur cloak and tossed it onto the seat beside her. He was watching her. He hadn't stopped watching her since they left the estate. The vehicle was moving, the convoy tearing down the mountain roads toward the capital, Goldheart. Stop shaking, he said. I can't, she stammered. Are you cold? I am terrified, Your Majesty. Desmond tilted his head. He reached into a compartment next to him and pulled out a crystal decanter of amber liquid. He poured a glass and held it out to her. Drink. It will settle your nerves. She hesitated, then took the glass with trembling fingers. She took a sip. It burned like fire, but it warmed the knot of ice in her stomach. Why? She asked, her voice small. Why me? I am a null. I am nothing. Desmond leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The space between them felt charged with electricity. Do you know what it is like to be an alpha of my lineage, Seraphima? She shook her head. It is loud, he said, gesturing vaguely to his head. My senses are dialed to a degree that is agonizing. I hear the heartbeat of the driver. I smell the fear of the deer in the woods 3 miles away. I smell the lust, the greed, and the deception of every wolf I meet. It is a constant cacophony. It never stops. It is driving me mad. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. But you are a void. When I am near you, the noise stops. The sensory overload dulls. It is quiet. For the first time in 10 years, my head is clear. Seraphima stared at him. She had spent her life believing her condition was a curse, a defect that made her worthless. To this man, her defect was a salve. So I am medicine? She asked, a bitter edge entering her voice. A palliative for the king? Desmond's eyes narrowed. You have a sharp tongue for a servant. I am not a servant anymore, am I? You took me. I did. To be what? Your mistress? Your pet? Desmond moved. He was fast, faster than any wolf she had ever seen. In a blink, he was seated next to her, crowding her against the door. He didn't touch her, but his heat encompassed her. I do not keep pets, Seraphima, and I do not take mistresses. He reached out and took her hand, the one with the scars. He ran his thumb over the rough skin. The Goldheart line is failing, he admitted, his voice low and rough. The madness takes us all in the end. My father, he lost his mind. He slaughtered half the court before I put him down. Seraphima stopped breathing. She had heard the stories, but hearing him confess to patricide was different. I feel the edges fraying, Desmond whispered, looking at her hand as if it were an anchor. The rage, the instinct to kill. It is always there, scratching at the door. But when I held your hand in that hall, the wolf settled. You are not medicine, Seraphima. You are a leash. He looked up, his golden eyes piercing her soul. I intend to make you my queen. The glass slipped from Seraphima's fingers and landed on the plush carpet, spilling amber liquid everywhere. You are insane, she whispered. The court will never accept it. I am a null. I cannot produce strong heirs. I cannot link with the pack. I am a pariah. I am the king, Desmond said simply, as if that explained everything. I rewrite the laws. They will eat me alive, she said, tears pricking her eyes. Rosalinde, the council, your enemies. They will see me as a weakness. They will kill me to get to you. Desmond's expression shifted. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the terrifying mask of the Alpha King. He reached out and cupped her face. His hand was large, his fingers strong enough to snap her neck, but his touch was impossibly gentle. Let them try, he growled. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. I won't hurt you, the Alpha King said, the promise vibrating through her skull. And I will slaughter anyone who tries. The convoy hit a bump, and Seraphima gasped, gripping his forearm. His muscles were like steel beneath the black fabric. We are approaching the border, Desmond said, pulling back slightly but keeping his hand on her cheek. Once we cross into Goldheart, there is no going back. You will be mine. Under my protection. Under my claim. I don't have a cent for you to claim, she reminded him sadly. You can't mark me. The bite won't take. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Desmond's face. It transformed him, making him look less like a monster and more like a fallen angel. There are other ways to claim a soul, Seraphima, he murmured. I don't need a mark to tell the world you are mine. I will put a crown on your head, and anyone who questions it will lose theirs. He sat back, pulling her with him until she was resting against his chest. It was improper. It was scandalous. It was the safest she had ever felt. Sleep, he commanded. We have a long war ahead of us. Seraphima closed her eyes. The rhythm of the engine and the steady, heavy beat of the king's heart beneath her ear lulled her into a trance. She was the Omega no one wanted, kidnapped by the king everyone feared. As the convoy sped into the darkness, leaving the snows of Wintervale behind, Seraphima realized the most terrifying truth of all. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of what she would do to keep him. Goldheart was not a city of snow and silence like Wintervale. It was a city of iron, rain, and screaming metal. As the armored convoy wound its way down the mountain passes and onto the vast industrial plains, Seraphima pressed her face against the reinforced glass. The capital of the Lycan Kingdom rose from the smog like a serrated knife aimed at the throat of the sky. Skyscrapers of black glass and steel dominated the horizon, connected by sky bridges that glowed with amber light. It was beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful, terrifying and overwhelming. It looks like a prison, Seraphima whispered. Desmond, who had been reviewing tactical maps on a tablet, looked up. The harsh city lights cast shadows across the jagged scar on his face. It is a fortress, he corrected. Wintervale hides in the snow. Goldheart stands in the fire. We forge the weapons that keep the borders safe. We refine the fuel. We bleed so the other territories can sleep. He set the tablet aside and watched her. The intensity of his gaze hadn't waned in the 6 hours they had been traveling. If anything, it had grown heavier. Every time he felt the headache of his sensory overload creeping in, he would reach out and touch her, her hand, her shoulder, a lock of her hair, and the tension would drain from his shoulders. They will not welcome you here, Desmond said bluntly. My court is predatory. They value strength above all else. To them, a null is an affront to biology. You sell it so well, Your Majesty, Seraphima murmured, clutching her dirty apron. Why did you bring me to a place that wants me dead? Because out there, he pointed to the wilderness, you are prey. In here, you are my prey. And I don't share. The convoy swept through the massive iron gates of the citadel, a brutalist palace that sat at the heart of the city. Guards in black tactical gear lined the walls, their sense sharp with discipline and fear. When the car stopped, the door was wrenched open by Bennett. The Beta looked exhausted. Sire, Bennett said, bowing his head. The council is already assembling. They heard about the incident in Wintervale. They know she's here. Let them wait, Desmond growled, stepping out and pulling Seraphima with him. The air in Goldheart smelled of ozone and wet asphalt. Seraphima shivered, not from cold, but from the sheer weight of the gazes fixed upon her. Hundreds of staff members, maids, guards, officials, stood in the courtyard. As Desmond led her toward the massive double doors, the silence was absolute. They weren't looking at the king. They were looking at her, the scentless girl, the ghost. Take her to the royal suite, Desmond ordered a severe-looking woman with greying hair who stood by the entrance. This was Matron Halloway, the head of the Citadel's staff. Burn those rags. Bathe her. Dress her in gold. Halloway's lip curled slightly, sniffing the air near Seraphima. She smells of nothing, sire. It is unsettling. It is an order, Holloway. Desmond's voice dropped an octave, the stone beneath their feet vibrating. If she is uncomfortable, if the water is too hot or the silk too scratchy, I will know. And you will answer for it. Holloway paled and bowed low. Yes, Alpha. Desmond turned to Seraphima. For a moment, amidst the steel and the soldiers, he looked hesitant. He reached out, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. I have to deal with the wolves, he said softly. Stay in the suite. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Desmond, she said, the name slipping out before she could add the title. He froze, his pupils blew wide, swallowing the gold irises. No one called him by his name. Come back, she whispered, terrified of being left alone in this shark tank. A rare, genuine smile touched his lips. Always. He turned and marched toward the war room, Bennett trailing in his wake. Seraphima was left with Matron Holloway, who looked at her as if she were a roach that had crawled out of a drain. This way, ghost, Holloway spat. The next 2 hours were a blur of scalding water and rough hands. Seraphima was scrubbed until her skin was raw, her hair washed with oils that smelled of sandalwood and amber. Desmond's scent. They were marking her, masking her emptiness with the king's signature. When she finally stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the royal suite, she didn't recognize herself. The dress was a column of black silk that pooled around her feet, embroidered with gold thread in the shape of thorns. It was backless, exposing the pale curve of her spine, and fit like a second skin. She looked regal. She looked dangerous. She looked like a sacrifice dressed for the altar. The war room of the citadel was a circular chamber, dominated by a massive table made of obsidian. 12 chairs surrounded it, each occupied by the alphas of the ruling families of Goldheart's provinces. Desmond stood at the head of the table, his hands resting on the dark stone. The air in the room was thick with aggression. The alphas were posturing, releasing waves of pheromones meant to intimidate. To Desmond, it smelled like a sewer of ego. You insult us, King Hartwell, snarled Alpha Vane, a man with a jaw like a bear trap and a reputation for cruelty. You go to the north for an inspection and return with a stray? A null? It makes the crown look weak. Weak? Desmond repeated the word softly. He began to walk around the table. The alphas stiffened. I secured the northern borders, Desmond said, his voice calm but carrying a lethal edge. I doubled the tithes from Wintervale. And I found the one thing in this God-forsaken kingdom that brings me peace. Peace is for the dead, Vane countered, standing up. He was nearly as tall as Desmond, foolishly brave. We need an heir, Desmond, a strong heir, not a pup born from a womb that carries no scent. The people are talking. They say the madness finally took you. They say you've brought a witch into the citadel. Sit down, Vane, Bennett warned from the corner, adjusting his glasses. Vane ignored the beta. I demand you send the girl back to the slums she crawled out of. Or perhaps, Vane grinned, exposing yellowed canines, we give her to the guard. Let them see if she breaks as easily as she looks. The silence that followed was absolute. Desmond stopped walking. He stood directly behind Vane's chair. You demand? Desmond whispered. The atmosphere in the room compressed. The lights flickered. The sensory overload that usually plagued Desmond. The ticking of the clock, the heartbeat of the guards, the smell of sweat, suddenly vanished. But it wasn't replaced by peace. It was replaced by a red, roaring silence. The wolf was surfacing. Desmond! No! Bennett pleaded, stepping forward. Desmond grabbed the back of Vane's head and slammed his face into the obsidian table. The sound of breaking bone echoed like a gunshot. Vane screamed, blood spraying across the polished stone. Desmond didn't let go. He ground the Alpha's face into the rock, his own eyes glowing with a feral, terrifying light. "I am the king!" Desmond roared, the sound distorted, more animal than human. "I am the Goldheart. I do not take demands from dogs." The other Alphas scrambled back, knocking over their chairs. This was it. The madness. The king had finally snapped. "Kill him!" Vane gargled, flailing. Two of Vane's personal guards drew their weapons. The double doors to the war room burst open. "Stop!" The voice was clear, bell-like, and cut through the chaos like a blade. Desmond froze. His hand was still gripping Vane's skull, his claws extended, digging into the scalp. He turned his head, his chest heaving. Seraphima stood in the doorway. She was wearing the black and gold dress, her hair cascading down her back like a river of ink. She looked terrified, but she didn't retreat. She walked into the room. The Alphas parted for her, confused by the lack of scent, unsettled by her presence. She walked straight up to Desmond, ignoring the blood, ignoring the guards with guns. "Desmond," she said firmly, "look at me." His eyes were wild, the pupils blown so wide they were almost black. He was breathing hard, lost in the rage. "They threatened you," he grated out. "I am here," she said, reaching out and placing her small, pale hand on his blood-stained fist. "I am safe. Let him go. He needs to die." "Not today," she said. "If you kill him now, you prove them right. You prove you are mad." She stepped closer until her body was pressed against his side. The contact was instant grounding. The static in Desmond's brain cleared. The red haze receded. He blinked, looking down at her hand covering his. He released Vane. The Alpha slumped to the floor, unconscious, his face a ruin. Desmond looked around the room. The other Alphas were staring at Seraphima with a mixture of horror and awe. She had just commanded the Alpha King in a blood rage, and he had obeyed. Desmond wrapped an arm around Seraphima's waist, pulling her tight against him. He looked at the trembling council. "This is not a witch," Desmond announced, his voice steady again. "This is your future queen, and as you can see, she is the only thing keeping you all alive." He turned to Bennett. "Clean up this mess." Then he swept Seraphima out of the room, leaving the council in stunned silence. Desmond didn't stop walking until they reached the highest point of the citadel, the glass garden. It was a massive greenhouse, suspended over the city, filled with exotic, poisonous plants that thrived in the industrial smog. He paced back and forth, wiping Vane's blood off his hands with a silk handkerchief. He was vibrating with residual adrenaline. Seraphima stood by a patch of black orchids, watching him. Her heart was still hammering in her chest. She had acted on instinct. When she heard the roaring from the hallway, she knew he was in trouble. Not physical trouble. Desmond could kill an army, but spiritual trouble. "You shouldn't have come in there," Desmond said, his back to her. "It wasn't safe. You were going to kill him. He deserved it." "Perhaps," she said quietly. But Bennett looked terrified. "You were losing control." Desmond turned, tossing the bloody cloth aside. He looked at her, really looked at her, drinking in the sight of her in the gold and black dress. "I lose control every day, Seraphima," he confessed, walking toward her. "The beast is too big for the cage. My father, he burned down the east wing because a servant dropped a tray. The madness is a rot in our bloodline. It amplifies everything. Anger becomes murder. Desire becomes obsession." He stopped in front of her. "I am terrified of what I might do to you." Seraphima looked up at him. She saw the fear behind the monster's mask. He wasn't afraid of his enemies. He was afraid of himself. "You said you wouldn't hurt me," she reminded him. "I said a lot of things. But when the red takes over..." He trailed off, reaching out to touch a lock of her hair. In that room, the moment you touched me, the silence came back. It was instant. You aren't just a null, Seraphima. You are a silencer, a genetic counterweight to an alpha's excess. Is that all I am? She asked, a sadness creeping into her voice. A tool to keep the king sane. Desmond's hand moved to the back of her neck, pulling her closer. No, you are the only person who has ever looked at me and seen a man, not a crown or a curse. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. I want to kiss you, Seraphima, but I am covered in another man's blood, and you look like a saint. I am no saint, she whispered, her hands rising to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart beating, a slow, powerful thud. I am just the girl who cleaned the floors. Not anymore. He closed the distance. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate. It tasted of iron and longing. Desmond kissed her as if she were the air and he was drowning. He groaned low in his throat, his arms tightening around her, lifting her slightly off the ground. For the first time in her life, Seraphima felt wanted, not useful, not tolerated, but consumed. A sharp shatter of glass broke them apart. Desmond spun around, shielding Seraphima with his body instantly. One of the high panes of the greenhouse had shattered. A small silver canister dropped onto the floor, hissing. Gas! Desmond barked. He didn't wait. He grabbed Seraphima and threw himself through the heavy oak doors of the atrium, slamming them shut, just as a cloud of green vapor expanded, wilting the black orchids instantly. Wolfsbane gas. Concentrated. Lethal to wolves. Desmond coughed, his eyes watering. He had inhaled a trace amount. He stumbled, leaning against the corridor wall. Desmond! Seraphima cried, grabbing his arm. I'm fine! He wheezed, his healing factor already fighting the toxin. Bennett! He roared down the hall. Guards came running, weapons drawn. Bennett was with them, looking pale. Secure the perimeter! Bennett shouted. Lock down the citadel! Desmond slid down the wall to a sitting position, shaking his head to clear the dizziness. Seraphima knelt beside him, checking his eyes. Who? Desmond growled, his voice thick. Who dares attack me in my own home? It wasn't vain, Seraphima said, her mind racing. He was unconscious. This was planned. Someone knew we would come here. Bennett knelt beside them. Sire, the ventilation system. If that gas had gone through the main vents, it would have killed everyone in the East Wing, Desmond finished. He looked at Seraphima. Including you. He grabbed her hand, squeezing it hard enough to bruise. The fear in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. They didn't want to kill me, Desmond realized. My system burns through Wolfsbane too fast. They wanted to kill you. Seraphima went cold. Why? Because you control me, Desmond hissed. And if they kill the leash, the monster goes free. They want the madness to consume me so they can justify a coup. He stood up, pulling Seraphima with him. He swayed slightly, but steadied himself. They want a war. Desmond bared his teeth, his canines fully extended. Then I will give them an apocalypse. He looked at Bennett. Call the Obsidian Guard. No one leaves the citadel. If a fly buzzes without my permission, crush it. He turned to Seraphima, lifting her chin with a finger. You stay by my side. If you have to sleep, you sleep in my bed. If you have to eat, you eat from my plate. You do not leave my sight. Do you understand? Yes, she whispered. Good. Desmond turned to look down the corridor, into the shadows of his own palace. The hunt is on. The royal suite, once a symbol of luxury, had become a bunker. For 3 days, the heavy blast doors remained sealed. Outside, the citadel was in lockdown, the Obsidian Guard scouring every inch of the city for the saboteur. Inside, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. Seraphima sat by the fire, watching Desmond pacing. He hadn't slept. The wolfsbane gas had cleared from his system, but the paranoia that followed was a toxin with no antidote. He moved like a caged tiger, shirtless, the jagged scars on his back twisting with every turn. "You need to rest," Seraphima said softly, breaking the silence that he craved so desperately. Desmond stopped. He looked at her, his golden eyes ringed with exhaustion. "If I sleep, the noise comes back. The dreams, they are loud." He walked over to her, dropping to his knees on the rug. It was a position of submission no king should ever take. But with her, he was just a man seeking quiet. He rested his head in her lap. "Touch me," he whispered. Seraphima ran her fingers through his dark, coarse hair. The effect was instantaneous. His muscles uncoiled, his breathing deepened. She was his anchor in a hurricane of sensory input. "Bennett is taking too long," Desmond murmured into the silk of her dress. "He should have found the traitor by now." "Maybe the traitor is someone he doesn't want to find," Seraphima suggested gently. Desmond stiffened. "Bennett is my brother in all but blood. He would die for me." "I don't doubt his loyalty, Desmond. I doubt his objectivity. Who had access to the ventilation shafts? Who knew we were going to the glass garden?" Desmond pulled back, looking up at her. "Only my personal staff. Bennett, the guard commander. And..." His eyes darkened. "Matron Holloway," Seraphima finished for him. "The woman who looked at me with sheer disgust. The woman who manages the keys to every door in this citadel." Desmond stood up. The peace shattered. "Holloway has served the crown for 40 years. She raised me after my mother died. And perhaps she thinks she knows what is best for the kingdom better than you do," Seraphima countered, standing to face him. "She called me a ghost. She said my lack of scent was unsettling. To a traditionalist like her, I am not a cure, Desmond. I am a pollution." Before Desmond could respond, the comms unit on the wall crackled to life. "Sire," Bennett's voice came through, distorted and breathless. "Do not open the door. We have a breach in the—" The line went dead with a sickening crunch of static. The lights in the suite flickered and died. The electronic locks on the blast doors disengaged with a heavy thud. Desmond moved instantly. He grabbed Seraphima and shoved her behind the heavy obsidian desk. He didn't reach for a gun. He didn't need one. His claws extended, black and razor-sharp, and a low, terrifying growl rumbled in his chest. "Stay down," he commanded. "If anyone comes near you, close your eyes. I don't want you to see what happens." The door slid open. They didn't burst in with guns blazing. They walked in slowly, their boots echoing on the marble floor. 6 figures clad in stealth gear, wearing gas masks, and behind them, unmasked, smiling a cold, aristocratic smile, was Corbin Stonevale. Seraphima gasped. The boy who had bullied her in the snows of Wintervale was standing in the heart of the Iron City. "Hello, Ghost," Corbin drawled, holding a heavy tranquilizer rifle. "I told you that you were annoying. You really should have stayed in the kitchen." "Corbin," Desmond said, his voice a vibration that shook the glass decanters on the shelf. "You have made a grave mistake." "Have I?" Corbin stepped aside. Matron Holloway walked in from the shadows. She held a remote control device. Her face was stone. "I am sorry, Desmond," she said, not looking at him, but at the floor. "You are sick. We tried to ignore it, but bringing her here, it is the final symptom. You are dismantling the purity of the line. We cannot allow a null to sit on the throne." "So you commit treason?" Desmond stepped forward, the darkness around him seeming to writhe. "We commit surgery," Corbin laughed. "We're cutting out the cancer." Corbin raised the rifle and fired. Desmond didn't dodge. He swatted the dart out of the air with supernatural speed. He roared, a sound that shattered the windows, and launched himself at the intruders. The fight was a blur of violence. Desmond moved faster than the eye could track. He tore through the first 2 guards before they could even raise their weapons. He was a whirlwind of claws and teeth, a primal force of nature unleashed in a confined space. But there were too many of them, and they were prepared. "Now!" Holloway shouted. 2 guards fired nets made of silver-threaded steel. They caught Desmond mid-air, wrapping around his limbs. Silver burned alphas on contact. Desmond howled, the smell of searing flesh filling the room. He thrashed, ripping the nets apart with brute strength. But the distraction cost him. Corbin fired a second shot. This one hit true. The dart buried itself in Desmond's neck. Desmond staggered back, ripping the dart out. He glared at Corbin, his eyes glowing furiously. "That won't stop me." "It's not a sedative, Your Majesty," Corbin smirked, reloading. "It's a stimulant. Synthetic adrenaline mixed with concentrated alpha pheromones. We aren't trying to put you to sleep. We're trying to wake you up." Seraphima watched in horror from behind the desk. They were inducing the madness. They were overloading his senses on purpose. Desmond fell to his knees, clutching his head. He screamed. It wasn't a battle cry, it was a sound of pure agony. The noise in his head, usually a dull roar, must have become a deafening explosion. "Kill the girl," Holloway ordered the remaining guards, "while he is distracted." 3 guards advanced on the desk. Seraphima looked around wildly. She had no weapon. She had no claws. She was just a servant. "No," she thought. "I am the queen." She grabbed the heavy crystal decanter from the desk and threw it. It smashed into the face of the first guard, blinding him with whiskey and glass. He stumbled back. Seraphima didn't hide. She ran. Not away from them, but toward Desmond. "Desmond!" she screamed. He didn't hear her. He was thrashing on the floor, clawing at the carpet, his eyes rolling back in his head. The veins in his neck were black and bulging. The overload was killing him. A guard grabbed Seraphima by the hair, yanking her back. She cried out, kicking at his shins, but he was too strong. He raised a combat knife. "Say goodbye to your pet, King," Corbin taunted. Suddenly, the wall of the suite exploded inward. Debris rained down. Through the dust, a figure emerged. Bennett. He was bleeding from a head wound, holding a heavy assault rifle. Behind him were the loyal Obsidian guards. "Open fire!" Bennett screamed. Bullets tore through the room. The guard holding Seraphima jerked and fell, releasing her. Corbin cursed, diving behind a sofa. Matron Holloway stood frozen, staring at the chaos she had unleashed, until Bennett tackled her to the ground. The room descended into a firefight, but Seraphima ignored the bullets. She crawled across the floor toward the center of the room, toward the writhing, screaming figure of the king. "Desmond!" she sobbed, reaching for him. He lashed out blindly. His backhand struck her across the cheek, sending her flying backward. She hit the floor hard, tasting blood. He stood up. He was fully gone now. The Goldheart King was dead. Only the monster remained. He looked around, panting, his eyes bleeding red. He didn't recognize Bennett. He didn't recognize the guards. He saw only threats. He looked at Seraphima. He growled, a sound of pure, predatory hunger. "Get back!" Bennett yelled at her, firing at Corbin, who was trying to flee. "Seraphima, get away from him! He doesn't know you!" Seraphima wiped the blood from her lip. She looked at the man who had promised not to hurt her. He was poised to kill her. The stimulant was driving him to destroy everything in sight. She stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she forced them to hold her weight. "I won't run," she whispered. She walked toward the monster. The room fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the king. The loyal guards lowered their weapons, unsure of what to do. They couldn't shoot their king, but they couldn't let him slaughter the girl. Desmond stalked toward her. Every step cracked the marble floor. The heat coming off him was blistering. "Desmond," Seraphima said, her voice steady, despite the terror gripping her heart. He didn't react to his name. He lunged. Seraphima didn't flinch. She stepped into his space. As his clawed hand came down to tear out her throat, she caught his wrist. It was a ludicrous image, her small, pale hand against his massive, lethal limb. By all laws of physics, he should have crushed her. But the moment skin touched skin, Desmond froze. The overload, the screaming noise, the burning sense, the chaotic feedback loop induced by the drug hit a wall of absolute zero. Seraphima didn't just touch him. She projected herself into him. She poured every ounce of her nothingness, her silence, into the connection. She wasn't just a null. She was a vacuum, swallowing the noise that tormented him. "Look at me," she commanded, echoing the words he had said to her in the chapel. Desmond's hand trembled in her grip. The red in his eyes flickered, warring with the gold. "It hurts," he rasped, the first human word he had spoken in minutes. "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. She reached up with her other hand and placed it on his chest, directly over his heart. "Let me take it. Give the noise to me." Desmond roared again, fighting the clarity. The drug was strong. He shoved her back, but she stumbled and came right back, wrapping her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest. "I am here," she murmured, over and over. "I am the quiet. I am the snow. You are safe." The guards watched in awe as the Alpha King, a man capable of tearing a tank apart, fell to his knees, wrapped in the arms of the scentless girl. He shook violently, fighting the chemical storm in his blood. Slowly, agonizingly, the tension left his body. The claws retracted. The oppressive heat dissipated. Desmond gasped, sucking in air as if he had been underwater. He slumped forward, his weight resting entirely on her. "Seraphima," he croaked. "I've got you," she whispered, stroking his sweat-dampened hair. "I've got you." Desmond lifted his head. His eyes were gold again. Exhausted, pain-filled, but gold. He looked at the bruise forming on her cheek, the mark he had made. A look of shattered devastation crossed his face. He reached out, his hand hovering over the injury, afraid to touch her. His voice broke. "I promised." "You came back," she said fiercely. "You didn't break the promise. You came back." Desmond closed his eyes for a second, composing himself. When he opened them, the vulnerability was gone. In its place was the cold, hard judgment of the king. He stood up, pulling Seraphima up with him, keeping her tucked into his side. He looked across the room. Bennett had Matron Halloway in cuffs. 2 guards were dragging a bleeding Corbin Stonevale from behind the sofa. Desmond walked toward them. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. "Desmond, please," Halloway wept, falling to her knees. "I did it for the family, for the legacy." "You tried to turn me into a rabid dog," Desmond said, his voice void of emotion. "You attacked my mate. You betrayed your king." He looked at Corbin. The Wintervale air spat blood on the floor. "Do it. Kill me. The North will rise." "The North will kneel," Desmond corrected, "because they will know what happens to those who touch what is mine." He turned to Bennett. "Take them to the wall," Desmond ordered. "Public execution. Sunrise. Let the city see." "Yes, sire," Bennett said, his voice grim. As they dragged the traitors away, Desmond turned back to Seraphima. He gently touched her bruised cheek, his thumb grazing the skin. "I almost killed you," he whispered, the horror of it still lingering in his eyes. "But you didn't," she said, covering his hand with hers. "You found me in the dark, Desmond. You always find me." He pulled her into him, burying his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of nothingness that was his salvation. "Never again," he vowed into her skin. I will burn the world before I let them touch you again. The coronation of Seraphima Whitford was not a traditional affair. There were no ancient chants from the elders, for the elders had been purged. There was no scent-marking ceremony, for the Queen had no scent to mark. Instead, it was a quiet affair in the newly repaired glass garden. Desmond stood before her, dressed in the formal black and gold of his house. He held a crown made not of heavy gold, but of woven platinum and black diamonds, light, sharp, and resilient. He placed it on her head. It fit perfectly. "They call you the Ghost Queen," Desmond told her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "They say you bewitched me." "Let them talk," Seraphima smiled, adjusting the weight of the crown. "As long as they bow." Desmond laughed, a genuine deep sound that startled a flock of birds in the trees above. He kissed her, right there in front of the court, in front of the cameras broadcasting to the 12 territories. It wasn't a kiss of possession, but of partnership. The Alpha King had found his silence, and the Omega no one wanted had found her voice. They stood together, looking out over the Iron City, hand in hand. The monsters were still out there. The politics, the rogue packs, the lingering shadows of the past. But for the first time in the history of the Goldheart line, the king was not afraid of the dark, because he held the light in his hand. Thank you for reading this tale of love, madness, and redemption. If Seraphima and Desmond's story captured your heart, please like this story, share it with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe for more dark, twisted fairy tales. Remember, sometimes the things we think are our greatest flaws are actually our greatest strengths. Until next time, keep howling at the moon.